Shadows of Coral Bay is a gripping murder mystery set in a small coastal town where dark secrets lie just beneath the surface. When investigative journalist Maggie Price uncovers a connection between the disappearance of a young girl and the town's most powerful figure, Robert Stone, she finds herself thrust into a dangerous web of corruption, deceit, and betrayal. As she digs deeper, Maggie uncovers an international trafficking ring that threatens to destroy everything she holds dear. With the clock ticking and her life at risk, Maggie must navigate a treacherous path to expose the truth, all while trying to survive those who will stop at nothing to silence her. In a town where nothing is what it seems, Maggie's fight for justice becomes a race against time, and the cost of uncovering the truth may be higher than she ever imagined. Chapter 1: A Quiet Town. The morning fog rolled in thick as a blanket, coating Coral Bay in a chilled, ethereal haze. It wasn't unusual for the coastal town to wake up to such mist, but today it felt heavier, like the entire town was holding its breath. Maggie Harper stared out the window of the small inn where she was staying, watching the mist curl around the silhouette of the lighthouse on the cliffs. Her car was parked just outside, its tires slick with dew. She hadn't been to Coral Bay in over 10 years, and it looked just as she remembered, quaint, serene, and yet oddly suffocating in its quietude. A stark contrast to the chaos of the city she had left behind, where the constant hum of life never ceased. But today, Coral Bay wasn't just quiet. It was grieving. It had been 2 weeks since Sophie Clark had disappeared. The local police were baffled, no one had seen or heard anything. There was no sign of a struggle. No ransom note. No witnesses. Only the lonely stretch of beach, where Sophie was last seen walking alone, late at night, under the full moon. Maggie turned away from the window and grabbed her notepad. She had a job to do, her latest assignment, the missing girl from a small town that, to most outsiders, didn't even seem to register on the map. The local paper had sent her in, but Maggie wasn't just looking to write a fluff piece. She was determined to get to the heart of what happened here, because something about this town, and Sophie's disappearance, didn't sit right with her. Maggie shoved the notepad into her bag and headed out the door. Chapter 2: The Clark Family. Maggie's first stop was the Clark family home. Amelia Clark had refused most interviews, but the paper had managed to secure a time for Maggie. The house was perched on a hill, overlooking the bay. It was an old, Victorian-style building, weathered by years of salt and wind, the paint chipped in places, but still proud in its structure. A sprawling garden, now overgrown and untended, surrounded the house, a stark contrast to the neat, manicured lawns of most of the town's properties. Maggie rang the doorbell. It was answered after a long pause by Amelia Clark, who looked nothing like the woman in the photos the newspaper had provided. Amelia's face was gaunt, her eyes hollow. She looked every bit the grieving mother, but there was something else there, something colder. Her eyes held a wariness, an impenetrable wall, as if she'd been hiding behind it for years. "Miss Harper," Amelia greeted her in a voice that was calm but distant. "You're here to ask about Sophie, I suppose?" Maggie nodded. "Yes, thank you for meeting with me. I know this must be hard, but if you could just tell me a little about Sophie, maybe something that could help." Amelia cut her off, her voice suddenly sharper. "You think I know something? You think I'm hiding something?" She took a breath, her tone softening again. "I don't know what happened to my daughter. But I can tell you, Sophie was not the girl you think she was." Maggie's mind raced. This was the second time in as many minutes that she had heard Sophie described in such a way. She had heard it from a few of Sophie's friends at the school, too, though they had been more reluctant to say it outright. Maggie pushed forward. Did she have any problems? Maybe something she was struggling with. Amelia's lips trembled for a moment, and her gaze dropped to the floor. She was upset about things. She didn't fit in. She wanted to leave Coral Bay, but I thought she was just being a teenager. She had her heart set on going to college, but she never told me how she was going to pay for it. I didn't think she was serious. Maggie took a mental note. Sophie had dreams of leaving the town, and yet, it seemed she never made plans to actually escape. Had that been part of the mystery? Or was it a red herring? Is there anything at all that might help? Any clue that Sophie left behind? Maggie asked gently. Amelia stood silent for a moment before shaking her head. The only thing I found was this. She handed Maggie a crumpled piece of paper, a scrap torn from a notebook. She'd been writing in it a lot in the weeks leading up to, well, everything. Maggie unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, hurried, but the words jumped out at her. I have to leave. There's no future here. I can't breathe. Someone will come for me, I know it. I just have to hold on. The words struck Maggie hard. It was clear Sophie had been struggling with something much more than a typical teenage rebellion. Something, or someone, had pushed her to the brink. Thank you, Maggie said quietly. I'll look into it. Amelia nodded but didn't say anything else. As Maggie turned to leave, she heard Amelia speak in a barely audible voice. I wish I could have protected her. Maggie's heart tightened. She had the feeling that Amelia wasn't just speaking about Sophie. She was speaking about herself. Chapter 3, The Beach. After leaving the Clark house, Maggie drove down to the beach, the place where Sophie had last been seen. The mist still clung to the rocks like ghostly fingers, making the beach seem even more isolated than it already was. The wind whipped across the water, carrying the scent of salt and decay. Maggie could see why someone like Sophie, who wanted out, might look to the water for escape. She parked near the cliffside and climbed out, her boots crunching against the pebbled sand. The beach was empty, save for a few scattered seagulls. It seemed like any other ordinary morning in Coral Bay, but Maggie knew better. There were things here, the hidden things, that only someone with fresh eyes could see. She walked along the shoreline, eyes scanning the sand for any trace of Sophie, any clue that might have been overlooked by the police. She spotted a small object near the water's edge, a silver locket, half buried in the sand. Maggie crouched down and picked it up. It was intricately designed, and on closer inspection, she saw that it was engraved with the initials SC. Sophie Clark's locket. Maggie's fingers brushed over the cool metal, and she felt a chill run up her spine. Someone had deliberately hidden this here, just out of sight, as if trying to tell a story without words. She slipped the locket into her pocket, her mind racing. There was more to Sophie's disappearance than anyone was letting on. And Maggie was determined to find out what. Chapter 4, Into the Fog. The next day, Maggie found herself at the local diner, sitting across from Liam Jameson. The young fisherman had agreed to speak with her, albeit reluctantly. He was in his late 20s, with dark, weathered eyes and hands that seemed too rough for someone his age. He had known Sophie since they were children, and it didn't take much to figure out there had been more to their relationship than either of them cared to admit. So Maggie started, taking a sip of her coffee. What can you tell me about Sophie? Liam stared at his hands for a long time before answering. She was different. Always had bigger dreams than the rest of us. She hated it here. His voice softened. But she was also the most alive when she talked about leaving. It's like she was waiting for something to happen, like she knew she couldn't stay. Maggie watched him closely, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. What happened the night she disappeared? Liam shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. I wasn't there, okay. But I saw her the day before. She was going on about how she was going to leave, how she was going to find a way to get out of this town. What else? Liam shifted again, his eyes darting around the diner, as if looking for someone. She was talking to someone. A guy. I didn't know him. She seemed scared. Scared? Why? Liam hesitated. I don't know. He was older than her. And he didn't seem right. Maggie's interest piqued. What do you mean, didn't seem right? Liam shook his head, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I don't know. I never got a good feeling about him. Something about him made me want to stay away. Maggie's heart skipped a beat. She'd seen that reaction before. The gut feeling that something wasn't right. Do you know who he was? Liam hesitated. I don't know, but I think he might have been connected to someone in town. His eyes met hers, dark and heavy. That's all I'm saying. Maggie didn't press further for now, but as she stood to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that Liam knew much more than he was letting on. And that whoever that mysterious man was, he might be the key to unlocking the truth. Chapter 5: Secrets in the Water. The next morning, Maggie found herself standing at the edge of the cliffs. The fog had rolled back in, thick as a woolen blanket, obscuring the view of the sea. The air was damp, heavy with the promise of more rain, but for now, it hung still and quiet. She had come here for a reason. The fisherman, Liam, had mentioned a man Sophie had been talking to before she disappeared. Sophie had been scared of him, but the details were vague. Maggie needed to figure out who this man was, but more importantly, she needed to know why Sophie had been so terrified. The mist parted for a brief moment, giving her a glimpse of the water below. The cliffs were jagged, sharp rocks stretching into the ocean, their black silhouettes looming against the grey sky. Maggie felt the weight of the place, a place that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of something that had yet to happen. Or perhaps something that had already occurred. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her editor, Theo. Theo, got an update from the police, nothing new on Sophie, but I've heard some local rumors about the mayor. Might be worth checking out. The town's not as squeaky clean as it looks. Maggie frowned, her curiosity piqued. Robert Stone, the mayor of Coral Bay, was a smooth talker, a man with his hand in every pocket of the town. He'd seemed too polished for the small-town vibe when she'd met him, almost as if he was trying too hard to be something he wasn't. But rumors. In a place like Coral Bay, where everyone knew everyone else's business, rumors weren't usually worth much. Still, Maggie wasn't one to dismiss anything, and with nothing else to go on, she decided to follow the lead. Maybe the mayor's connections would lead her to the answers she needed. Chapter 6: The Mayor's Secrets. Maggie drove to the town hall, a small, brick building at the center of Coral Bay, the kind of place that felt more like a historical landmark than a functioning government office. Inside, the walls were lined with framed photos of past mayors, town celebrations, and local history, the scent of old wood and dust in the air. She approached the receptionist, an older woman with thick glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked. "I'm here to see Mayor Robert Stone," Maggie said, trying to sound confident, though she was sure the receptionist could tell she was a stranger. The receptionist gave her a once-over before pressing a button on her desk and speaking into the intercom. "Mayor Stone, you have a visitor." Maggie didn't have to wait long before the door opened, and the mayor himself appeared. Robert Stone was in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit with a crisp white shirt and a red tie. He looked every bit the part of a politician, with a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo, and eyes that never seemed to stop calculating. "Maggie Harper," he greeted, extending his hand. "What can I do for you?" Maggie shook his hand, feeling the firm grip that matched his polished exterior. "I'm investigating the disappearance of Sophie Clark, and I heard that you might be able to help." The mayor's expression faltered for just a moment, but it was enough for Maggie to notice. He was careful, though, and quickly recovered. "I wish I could tell you something useful, but I'm afraid the police are handling the case, Ms. Harper. I have no new information to offer." Maggie studied him, wondering if he was being completely honest. The thing is, I've heard some rumors, Mayor Stone. Some people think there's more to Sophie's disappearance than what's being said publicly. Stone's lips tightened, just a fraction, but he still smiled. Rumors, Ms. Harper, are the last thing this town needs. We've always been a tight-knit community, and we'll get to the bottom of this. I'm sure the police will. I'm not just here for a newspaper article, Mayor, Maggie interrupted, her voice firm. I'm here to find the truth. The mayor's smile never wavered, but there was a brief flicker of something else, unease. I understand your position, but I'm afraid I don't know how I can be of help. If there's anything I can do, I'll be happy to support the investigation. Maggie was about to press him further when the receptionist suddenly spoke up. Mr. Stone, you have a call. Stone's eyes flashed briefly to the receptionist before turning back to Maggie. Excuse me for a moment. He disappeared into his office, leaving Maggie standing alone in the hallway. She hadn't expected much from the mayor, but the brief moment of discomfort told her there was something more beneath the surface. She needed to dig deeper. Maggie stood there, contemplating her next move, when the receptionist cleared her throat. You're looking for the mayor, huh? She asked, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. Maggie turned, intrigued. What do you know? The receptionist hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Stone was still in his office. Let's just say he's got his hands in more than one cookie jar. The town's redevelopment project, the one he's been pushing through. There are rumors that it's not just about making Coral Bay a hotspot for tourists. People are saying there's money being funneled under the table. I don't know much, but if you're digging into Sophie's case, you might want to take a look at that. Maggie's heart raced. The mayor's development project had seemed too good to be true when she'd first heard about it. Now, it seemed like it might be connected to something darker. Thank you, she said, offering a smile. I'll look into it. Chapter 7, Down by the Docks. That afternoon, Maggie found herself walking along the docks, the salty air stinging her skin as she surveyed the scene. The harbor was quieter than usual, the fishing boats tethered to their moorings, bobbing gently in the water. The fog had lifted slightly, and she could see more of the town stretching along the shoreline. It looked peaceful from here, almost idyllic. But Maggie knew better. There was a storm coming, and it wasn't the weather. Liam had told her about the mysterious man Sophie had been talking to, the man who had made her uncomfortable. Maggie had learned that the local fishing industry was an important part of the town's economy, and as she walked past the boats, she wondered if that man could be connected to the docks in some way. Fishermen were known to have their own networks, their own code of silence. She stopped near a group of men unloading crates from a boat, trying to blend in as she listened to their conversation. Most of it was small talk about the weather and the catch of the day, but one man, an older fisherman with a weathered face, mentioned something about a stranger who had been asking questions about the Clark family recently. Maggie's ears perked up. What kind of questions? She asked, walking over. The man eyed her with suspicion, but then seemed to relent, perhaps due to the sincerity in her voice. Don't know. Just that he was asking about the girl, Sophie. Said he was looking for something. I didn't like the look of him, though. Did he say where he was from? Maggie pressed. The man shook his head. No, just a stranger. Didn't sit right with the others either. Some of the guys noticed him hanging around the docks a few days ago. Thought maybe he was a tourist. But now we are wondering if he's been here for a while. Do you know anything else about him? A name? Maggie asked, her heart racing. The fisherman shrugged. Sorry, don't know much. Just that he had a dark aura about him. Like he wasn't welcome here. Maggie's mind was already racing. A stranger, asking about Sophie. This was the lead she needed. She had to find out who this man was. And if he had anything to do with Sophie's disappearance, or if, as the fisherman had suggested, he had been hiding in plain sight for much longer. Chapter 8: The Stranger's Shadow. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger, who had been asking questions about Sophie, was the key to unlocking everything. The fisherman's vague description, dark aura, unwelcoming presence, stuck in her mind. Sophie had mentioned someone coming for her in the weeks before she disappeared. Was this the man she had feared? Was he the one responsible for Sophie's vanishing? The sun was beginning to set as Maggie walked back to her car, her mind racing with possibilities. The fog had returned, swirling over the town in thick coils, hiding the cliffs and harbor behind a veil of grey. The air felt heavier now, as though something was about to break. She checked her phone. A new message from Theo. Theo, I've dug a little more into the mayor's redevelopment project. You're right to be suspicious. I found some strange connections to a company based in Seattle. One of the investors is an anonymous foreign entity. It's shady, Maggie. Dig deeper. Maggie read the message twice, her heart thumping in her chest. If the mayor's project had something to do with Sophie's disappearance, she needed to act fast. The town's future was being built on more than just land, it seemed like it was built on lies, and Sophie might have uncovered something too dangerous for the powers that be to ignore. She decided to go back to the mayor's office. Maybe, if she was persistent enough, she could get him to slip up. But this time, she wasn't just going to ask questions. She was going to confront him. Chapter 9: The Confrontation. The mayor's office was quiet when Maggie arrived. The receptionist glanced up from her paperwork, but this time she didn't hesitate. The mayor's in a meeting, but you can wait if you want, she said, her tone implying that Maggie was once again being dismissed. Maggie felt a surge of irritation, but held it back. She wasn't here to be dismissed. She had a job to do. I'll wait, Maggie said firmly, taking a seat by the window. She needed a plan. This time, she was going to be more than just a reporter. She was going to be someone who had a deep understanding of what was at stake. Sophie's life. The town's future. Her own truth. All of it was tied together. An hour passed before the door to the mayor's office finally opened. Robert Stone stepped out, his suit perfectly in place, his expression neutral. Maggie, he greeted her as though nothing had changed. What brings you back? Maggie didn't smile. She stood up, her voice firm. I know you're hiding something, Mayor Stone. And I know you're involved in things far darker than you're letting on. I'm not here for a dance around the issue. I'm here for the truth. Stone's eyebrows shot up slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he regained control. You're out of line, he said, his voice cold. This is a small town, and we don't take kindly to threats. I'm not threatening you, Maggie shot back. I'm telling you that I know about the redevelopment project. The shady investors. The money that's being funneled into this town under the table. Stone's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening. I don't know what you think you know, but I don't have time for this. You need to leave. But Maggie pressed on. Sophie Clark found out something, didn't she? Something you didn't want her to see. She was getting too close to the truth, so Maggie caught herself before she could finish. She had to stay calm, stay in control. You made her disappear. Stone stared at her, his face a mask of barely contained rage. But then, something changed in his eyes. He relaxed, his posture shifting from defensive to almost casual. I see, he said, his voice smooth and cold. You think you're uncovering something big, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, Ms. Harper. You're playing with fire. And fire burns. Maggie's stomach clenched, her instincts screaming that she had pushed too far. She needed to get out of there, but she couldn't back down now. Not after everything she'd uncovered. "Where is she, Stone?" Maggie asked, her voice low but steady. "Where is Sophie Clark?" Stone's lips curled into a tight, controlled smile. "You're wasting your time, Maggie. You're too late. The town is already changing, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." His words hung in the air, leaving Maggie with a sick feeling deep in her gut. She could feel it now, the weight of the town's secrets pressing down on her, the walls closing in. She needed to get out, to think, to process. "I'll find the truth," Maggie said, her voice shaking only slightly. "And when I do, you'll regret it." Without waiting for his response, Maggie turned and walked out, leaving Stone's laughter echoing in her ears. Chapter 10, Unearthing the Past. Maggie returned to her inn, her mind spinning. She had a deep, gut-wrenching feeling that she was right. The mayor was hiding something. But what? And why would he go to such extremes to cover it up? Sophie's disappearance wasn't just about a missing girl. It was about power. Control. Money. Her phone buzzed again. It was a call from Liam Jameson. "Maggie," his voice crackled through the speaker. "I need to talk to you. It's about Sophie." She sat up straighter. "What's happened?" "There's something I didn't tell you," Liam said, his voice low. "Something I should have said before, but I was scared. I didn't know who to trust. But now I'm sure." "Liam, what is it?" Maggie's heart raced. "Last year, Sophie found something. I don't know exactly what it was, but she was really shaken up about it. She was convinced someone was watching her. And she was convinced the mayor was involved. I didn't believe her at first, but now, after everything that's happened, I think she was right." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. "The mayor?" "Yeah. I saw her leave the town hall late one night, and she was in a hurry. I tried to talk to her, but she wouldn't listen. She was afraid, Maggie. She was terrified. I think she knew what was coming, and she tried to run. But I don't think she ever got the chance." Maggie clenched her fists. "I have to find out what she discovered. If she was right, this could be bigger than I thought." Liam's voice dropped to a whisper. "Be careful, Maggie. If you dig too deep, you might disappear too." The line went silent for a moment, and Maggie felt the weight of his words press down on her. Was she truly ready for the danger that lay ahead? She had no choice. Sophie's disappearance, the town's dark secrets, and the twisted connections between them, Maggie was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Chapter 11, The Hidden Files. The next day, Maggie returned to the town hall, her mind set on finding evidence that would tie the mayor to Sophie's disappearance. She had an idea. The town's archives were kept in a dusty room on the third floor, filled with old town records and government files. It was open to the public, but most people didn't think to use it. She found the room deserted when she arrived. Rows upon rows of old filing cabinets, papers stacked high, and dust hanging in the air. Maggie immediately started searching through the files, looking for anything that might link the mayor to shady dealings with the redevelopment project. She had to find proof, something that could be tied directly to Sophie's suspicions. As she rifled through a stack of town council minutes from the past few years, a name caught her eye. One of the investors in the mayor's project was a company called Blackstone Enterprises, a firm with ties to international organizations and some very questionable activities. There were references to off-the-books payments, secret deals, and, shockingly, a partnership between Blackstone and a local shipping company, the same company that operated out of the docks in Coral Bay. A chill ran down Maggie's spine. She had a feeling Sophie had uncovered this information, and it was the reason she had gone missing. She was getting too close. Too many people had something to hide. But now Maggie had the proof she needed. The only question was, what would she do with it? And how much was she willing to risk to expose the truth? Chapter 12, The Web Unravels. Maggie didn't sleep much that night. Her mind raced with the implications of what she had uncovered. Blackstone Enterprises. The shipping company. The mayor's secret dealings with foreign investors. It all pointed to something far bigger than just a missing girl. Sophie had stumbled onto something powerful people wanted to remain hidden. And now, Maggie was dangerously close to the truth. As dawn broke, Maggie knew she couldn't stay in Coral Bay much longer without drawing attention to herself. She needed to move quickly, but she also needed backup. She called Theo, who had been following her investigation from afar. Theo, you've found something big, haven't you? Maggie sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't know how big, but it's not just about Sophie anymore. The mayor is neck-deep in this redevelopment project, and there's a company, Blackstone Enterprises, that's involved. They are linked to international money laundering, shipping routes, and all kinds of shady business. Theo, shit. That's not something you can handle alone, Maggie. You need to go to the cops with this. Maggie hesitated. I don't trust the cops here. The town's too small, too insular. The mayor's got his fingers in too many pies. If I go to them, I'm as good as dead. I need something concrete, something undeniable before I can make a move. Theo, you've got the evidence, right? You can go public with it. The story could be huge. Maggie stared out the window at the fog rolling in over the cliffs. She felt like she was walking a tightrope, and the ground was shifting beneath her. I need more. A paper trail. I need to tie Blackstone directly to Sophie's disappearance. Until I have that, I'm not ready to go public. But I'll need to meet you soon, Theo. This is bigger than anything I've done before. Theo, I'll arrange something. But be careful. If you've got the mayor watching you, you're playing a dangerous game. Maggie hung up, the weight of his words heavy on her chest. There was no turning back now. She had to finish what she started. Chapter 13, Under the Surface. The next morning, Maggie made her way back to the docks. She couldn't shake the feeling that the shipping company was more than just a business in Coral Bay, it was the key to everything. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. The mayor's development project, the shipping routes, Blackstone Enterprises. They were all connected. As Maggie walked along the pier, she spotted a familiar face. Liam was standing by a boat, staring out at the water. His face was drawn, and his eyes were shadowed with worry. Liam, Maggie called, approaching him carefully. We need to talk. He turned to face her, his expression tense. What did you find? He asked, his voice low. I found a connection, Maggie said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Blackstone Enterprises. They've been funneling money into the mayor's redevelopment project. The same project the mayor's been pushing for years. But it's not just about new buildings and hotels. There's something else. Something darker. Liam ran a hand through his hair, his gaze flicking to the docks as if searching for something, or someone. I told you, Sophie knew something. She started to piece it together before she disappeared. She was talking about shipping companies and illegal cargo. I didn't think it was possible, but now. Maggie leaned in. Do you think the shipping company is involved in what happened to Sophie? Liam hesitated. I don't know, but I think the people who run this town will do anything to protect what they've built. They don't care who gets hurt. Sophie got too close, and I think that's why she's gone. I don't know if you'll be able to get the truth, Maggie. People like Stone don't lose without a fight. Maggie's heart clenched. I don't care about losing. I care about finding out what happened to Sophie. Liam nodded solemnly. Then we need to dig into Blackstone. But be careful. There are people around here who don't want you asking questions. Chapter 14, The Silent Witness. With new resolve, Maggie set out to investigate Blackstone Enterprises further. She knew she needed more information, something tangible that could link the company to Sophie's disappearance. If she could connect the shipping company directly to the mayor, and through that, to Sophie, it would be enough to crack the case wide open. Her first stop was the Coral Bay Public Library. The archives there were extensive, and Maggie hoped to find something that could shine a light on Blackstone's operations in the area. She spent hours combing through old records, business filings, and local news clippings. It wasn't until she was nearly ready to give up that she found something interesting. In a dusty folder labeled Shipping and Trade, Maggie found an article from 5 years ago. It was a small piece buried in the back of a local newspaper. It described a scandal involving a cargo shipment that had been seized by authorities in Seattle. The shipment contained illegal goods, human trafficking victims, drugs, and weapons. The company implicated in the scandal: Blackstone Enterprises. Her heart pounded. This was the break she'd been waiting for. But the article had been vague. There were no follow-ups, no investigations, and the story had disappeared as quickly as it had come. Maggie needed to dig deeper. That's when she noticed a name mentioned in the article, a local businessman who had been associated with Blackstone at the time of the scandal. It was a name she recognized: Thomas Blake. Blake was a quiet figure in Coral Bay, known for his involvement in various business ventures. He had a reputation for being elusive, but Maggie knew she had to find him. She tracked him down to a small, run-down office on the edge of town. Blake was inside, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a nervous, twitchy demeanor. When Maggie approached him, he looked up sharply, as though expecting her. "Blake?" Maggie asked, keeping her tone neutral. "I need to ask you some questions about Blackstone Enterprises." His eyes darted toward the door, and for a moment, Maggie thought he might bolt. But he didn't. Instead, he waved her in. "Come inside," he said quietly. "But you didn't hear it from me." As she stepped inside, Blake closed the door behind her, his eyes scanning the street nervously before he spoke again. "Blackstone, they've been running things in Coral Bay for years, even if you don't see it. The shipping, the contracts, the redevelopment projects. But it's not just business. It's a cover for something bigger. They've been using this town as a front for illegal operations for a long time." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of operations?" Blake hesitated, his face turning pale. "Human trafficking. Drugs. Even weapons. They've got a network that stretches all over the Pacific, and they use this town to launder their money. They made deals with the mayor, with other influential people, to keep it quiet." Maggie's mind was reeling. This was it. This was the connection she had been looking for. "But Sophie, what does she have to do with this?" Maggie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake looked away, his eyes filling with regret. "Sophie found out. She stumbled onto something she shouldn't have, something I wish she hadn't. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. She got too close to the truth." Maggie's stomach dropped. "Where is she, Blake?" Blake swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "I don't know. But I can tell you this much: if you keep digging, you're going to end up like her. You'll disappear, just like Sophie did. These people, Blackstone, the mayor, they don't care who gets in their way." Maggie's mind was racing. She knew she couldn't back down now. But she also knew she was walking into a danger far deeper than she had ever imagined. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "But I have to know the truth. And I'll find it, no matter the cost." Chapter 15, A Town on Fire. With Blake's words echoing in her mind, Maggie felt the final pieces of the puzzle fall into place. She had uncovered the truth: Blackstone Enterprises, the mayor, the shipping company, the illegal operations. It was all connected. And Sophie had known too much. That was why she had disappeared. But Maggie was no longer just a reporter. She was a woman on a mission. The stakes were too high, and the town of Coral Bay was hiding a dark secret that had to be exposed. Sophie's death, if it came to that, couldn't be in vain. Maggie's next move was crucial. She had the evidence she needed, but now, she had to decide whether to go public or take the more dangerous route and confront the people who were responsible for everything. As the fog rolled in over the cliffs, a town built on secrets seemed poised for destruction. Maggie had uncovered the truth, and now it was time to light the fuse. Chapter 16: The Breaking Point. The air in Coral Bay was heavy with a sense of impending storm. Maggie felt it deep in her bones. Everything she had uncovered, the illegal shipping routes, Blackstone Enterprises, the mayor's corruption, it was all leading to this moment. She couldn't walk away. She couldn't stop. Sophie's disappearance, the people who had gone missing before her, all of it was part of something much bigger, and Maggie was the one standing between the truth and its complete burial. That night, Maggie met with Theo in a quiet, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. The darkened windows shielded them from any prying eyes, but she knew that even here, the shadows seemed to stretch a little longer than they should. Theo slid into the seat opposite her, his expression taut with worry. "You're pushing it too hard, Maggie. I know you're trying to get the whole story, but this is dangerous." Maggie stared at the folder she had placed in front of him. "I have the full story now. The mayor. Blackstone. The shipping company. Sophie. They are all connected. I have the proof, Theo. I just need to go public." Theo exhaled slowly, glancing at the door nervously. "I don't know, Maggie. People around here, they don't take kindly to outsiders stirring things up. And the mayor. He's got too many people in his pocket. If you go public with this—" "I don't have a choice," Maggie interrupted. "Sophie's dead, Theo. She's gone. And I'm not going to let this town bury the truth along with her." Theo rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes heavy with the weight of what she was saying. "You're walking into a trap. You know that, right?" "I don't care," Maggie said quietly. "I need to make sure this stops. I can't just let them destroy everything for money. For power." For a moment, there was silence between them, a silence that spoke volumes. Theo knew the risks better than anyone. He had been in this game long enough to see how people like Stone, and the people behind him, operated. But Maggie had made up her mind. She had to go through with it. "Theo," Maggie continued, her voice soft but firm, "I need your help. I need to get this story out, whether it's through your connections, or through any other way we can manage. I'll be the face of it. But I need backup. They'll come after me, and they'll do everything to stop me." Theo looked at her, a flash of something like respect crossing his face. "You've got it, Maggie. I'll help you. But you need to be prepared. If you go forward with this, it's not just your career that's on the line anymore." Maggie nodded, her throat tightening. She had been prepared for this since the moment she first stepped foot in Coral Bay. She hadn't known how dark things would get, but now that she was this close to the truth, there was no turning back. She owed it to Sophie. She owed it to the town, to everyone who had been silenced. "We are going to expose them," Maggie said, her resolve solidifying. "It's time." Chapter 17: The Final Countdown. The next few days were a blur. Maggie and Theo worked tirelessly to assemble all the evidence, cross-referencing it with public records, interviewing key sources, and building the case. Theo used his journalistic contacts to secure a meeting with an editor at a major news outlet in Seattle. If they were going to go public, they needed the story to break beyond Coral Bay. They needed it to be national news. But as the hours passed, Maggie felt the weight of their actions pressing down on her more heavily. The people they were up against were dangerous. And as the tension in the town grew, Maggie knew someone was watching her. She could feel the eyes on her at all times, someone who didn't want the truth to see the light of day. Late one night, as Maggie was returning to her room at the inn, she was startled by a sudden noise in the shadows. She froze, her heart thudding in her chest. A figure stepped forward from the darkness. It was Liam. "Maggie," he whispered urgently. "You have to listen to me. I tried to warn you, but I didn't think they were going to move this fast. You're in danger." "What are you talking about?" Maggie asked, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and confusion. "They know what you're doing," Liam said, glancing around nervously. "The mayor, Blackstone, this isn't just about stopping you from publishing a story. It's about stopping you from getting out of here alive." Maggie's stomach twisted. "You mean they'll kill me?" Liam nodded grimly. "They don't hesitate. People like you, people who dig too deep, they disappear without a trace. Just like Sophie." Maggie's pulse raced as the gravity of Liam's words sank in. "What do I do?" "You need to leave," Liam urged. "Get out of Coral Bay before it's too late. If they know you're still here, they'll make sure you don't leave alive." Maggie shook her head, stubbornness rising within her. "I can't leave, Liam. Sophie's dead. I'm not going to run while the people who killed her get away with it." Liam grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "You don't get it, Maggie. They are not going to stop. If you stay, you're dead. You have to go. They've already found out what you know. I don't care how much you want justice, but you need to get out of here while you still can." Maggie was silent for a moment, her mind racing. Everything she had worked for, everything she had uncovered, was it worth risking her life for? The answer came to her, as clear as the fog that rolled in off the water. "Yes. I'm not going anywhere, Liam," she said quietly, her voice resolute. "I'm going to bring them down. And I'm going to make sure Sophie didn't die for nothing." Liam's face softened, a mixture of fear and respect in his eyes. "Then be careful. And don't trust anyone. Not even me." Before she could respond, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Maggie standing in the cold, her resolve hardened like steel. Chapter 18, The Storm Breaks. Maggie's heart was racing as the days stretched on, each moment feeling like a ticking clock counting down to her inevitable confrontation. Theo had arranged everything. The story was ready to be released. But Maggie knew that once it went public, there would be no going back. As she walked to the small newspaper office to meet with Theo, the air felt thick with tension. The town was on edge. The fog had rolled in again, blanketing the streets, creating a sense of isolation. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her, but when she turned a corner, the street was empty. They were watching, though. She finally reached the office, finding Theo and a couple of trusted journalists waiting for her. "We are ready," Theo said, his face tight with the same mix of excitement and dread that Maggie felt. "The story's been set up. It'll break in Seattle tomorrow morning. Once it's out, there's no turning back." Maggie nodded. "Let's do it." But just as she was about to sit down and finalize the article, the door burst open, and a shadow loomed in the doorway. Maggie's blood ran cold. It was Robert Stone, the mayor himself, flanked by two burly men. "I was wondering when you'd finally come crawling out," Stone sneered, his voice cold and calculated. "You've made your choices, Maggie. But now, you'll face the consequences." The door slammed shut behind them, and for the first time, Maggie felt the true weight of the danger she was in. This was it. The final showdown. Chapter 19, The Confrontation. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as Robert Stone stepped forward, his eyes cold, his hands clasped behind his back like a man who had long ago resigned himself to controlling everything in his path. "I've given you plenty of time to back off, Maggie." Stone's voice was low, dangerous, like the growl of an animal that knew it had you cornered. "But now, you've gone too far. You think you can bring down everything I've built here. Everything my family has built for decades." Maggie felt the weight of his words hanging in the air, heavy and suffocating. Theo had already moved to the side, his face a mask of concern. There was no pretending anymore. Stone wasn't here to talk. He was here to silence her. "We are not going to just roll over because you've got a story you think matters," Stone continued, his lip curling into a thin smile. "You've been poking around, asking questions you shouldn't be asking. You've threatened to expose us. And now, you're about to pay the price for your stubbornness." The two men flanking him, henchmen, probably, stepped forward slightly, their stance widening as if ready to make a move at any moment. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribcage. Every instinct in her told her to run, to flee, but her feet were nailed to the ground. She couldn't let him intimidate her, not now. Not after everything she'd uncovered. Sophie's death, the trafficking, the mayor's involvement. Everything was leading to this moment. She stepped forward, defiant. "You're wrong, Robert. This story isn't about me. It's about the truth. About the lives you've destroyed to cover up your dirty dealings. People deserve to know what you've been hiding, and I'm going to make sure they do." Stone's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing with a hint of fury. He glanced over at his men, then back at her. For a moment, Maggie thought he might lash out. The silence in the room thickened. "You really think you're untouchable because you've got a story in your hand," he sneered. "You're just a reporter. Do you know how many people I've buried to protect my interests, Maggie? People like you don't get to walk away from something like this." Maggie stood her ground, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'm not afraid of you, Stone. You can try to intimidate me, but it won't work. I've got the evidence. I've got enough to bring you down. And once this goes public, it's over for you. You can't silence the truth forever." For a moment, something in Stone's face flickered, a hint of panic. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled into fists. It was only then that Maggie realized, he was scared. "Do you really think people will believe you, Maggie?" he asked, his voice suddenly quieter, colder. "A lone journalist against a man like me. I've got power. I've got connections. And if you think anyone is going to care about some missing girl, you're dead wrong." The two men moved closer, their eyes locked on Maggie, waiting for a command. She didn't move. But then, just as Stone's hand began to twitch, a sharp voice broke through the tension. "Don't think it's just you we are afraid of, Stone." Theo had stepped forward, his voice shaking but resolute. "You've underestimated the reach of this story. It's not just in our hands anymore. It's already out. There's nothing you can do to stop it." Maggie felt her heart skip a beat. Theo had done it. The mayor froze, his expression faltering. "What are you talking about?" he growled. Theo's lips curled into a grim smile. "Your secret's already in the hands of people who will make sure it gets out, whether you like it or not. We've got contacts. A journalist in Seattle is already preparing to run the story." The tension in the room was unbearable. Robert Stone's eyes flicked to his men, then back to Maggie and Theo, calculating, weighing his options. Maggie knew this was the pivotal moment, the moment when Stone had to choose whether to escalate or retreat. For a few seconds, it felt like time itself had slowed. Maggie was holding her breath, watching him closely. Then, without warning, Stone's face twisted into a bitter grin, and he waved his hand dismissively. "Well then," he said with a low, guttural laugh, "We'll see who has the last word." Stone's men moved forward, but Maggie didn't wait for them to make their move. She grabbed the nearest chair and swung it toward them with all her might. One of the men barely managed to dodge the blow, but it gave Theo the moment he needed to grab the phone and start dialing. "What the hell are you doing?" Stone's voice was a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You're not going to get away with this," Theo shouted, his finger hovering over the call button. "We've already got it all in place. If you touch us, you'll be finished." Stone's eyes flicked to the phone in Theo's hand, his confidence wavering. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. His henchman hesitated, looking to him for direction, but the mayor's expression was calculating. He was weighing whether to push further or retreat. Then, Stone's shoulders slumped slightly. He exhaled in resignation. "Fine," he spat. "You think this is over? It's not. You've started something you can't finish." He turned on his heel and walked toward the door, his men trailing behind him. Maggie's pulse didn't settle as the door slammed behind them, but she knew something had changed. For the first time in this investigation, Stone had backed down. Maggie and Theo had won this round. Theo let out a shaky breath, setting the phone down and running a hand through his hair. "I didn't think we were going to make it out of that alive." Maggie felt the adrenaline begin to drain from her body. She leaned against the table, trying to steady herself. "Neither did I." But as she looked at the pile of documents on the table, the folders, the recordings, the photographs, everything she had worked for, everything that had been a part of this investigation, she knew they had only just scratched the surface. This wasn't over. Not yet. "Don't get too comfortable, Maggie," Theo said quietly. "The worst is still to come. Stone won't give up that easily." Maggie nodded, her resolve hardening once more. "I know. But we are not going to stop. Not now. Not ever." Chapter 20, The Unraveling. The story hit the wires first thing the next morning, as promised. It didn't take long for the tremors to begin. At first, it seemed like a small ripple. A local story about a missing girl and a suspected criminal syndicate. But as the details spread, Sophie's involvement, the town's secrets, the hidden ties between Blackstone Enterprises and the mayor, the ripple became a wave. Reporters from across the country descended on Coral Bay. Investigators followed the paper trail from Seattle to Portland, and soon, the international connections to the human trafficking network became too vast to ignore. Maggie's phone rang constantly, interviews lined up with national outlets, calls from law enforcement, questions from federal agencies. But even as the story was unfolding, the danger remained. Stone's empire was built on blood, deceit, and intimidation. Maggie knew they wouldn't let this go without a fight. As the dust began to settle, the shadows of Coral Bay grew longer, and Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that they were just getting started. The mayor had already begun his counterattacks. His team had started to discredit her, twist her words, and launch smear campaigns. But Maggie wasn't backing down. She had taken down a giant. And if they thought they could scare her into silence, they were gravely mistaken. Maggie was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 21, The Price of Truth. The morning after the story broke, Coral Bay felt different. The sleepy coastal town, once pristine in its quiet deception, was now buzzing with the weight of revelation. News trucks lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, broadcasting the scandal far beyond the town's limits. Maggie's phone hadn't stopped ringing, and the flood of emails seemed endless. But amidst the newfound attention, the looming presence of danger still hung thick in the air. Theo had barely slept. They both knew the fight wasn't over, it was only just beginning. As Maggie sat in her small office, she sifted through stacks of documents, making sure nothing was overlooked. There was too much to go through, too much evidence of corruption, of lives destroyed, of the victims who had been ignored for far too long. She couldn't let it all slip away now. Her phone buzzed, breaking her focus. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Maggie," the voice on the other end was urgent, clipped. "It's Liam. You need to get out of town. Now?" Maggie's stomach tightened. "What? Why? What's going on?" "I've been hearing things," Liam said, his voice low, frantic. "Stone's not done. He's already making calls. He's moving his people around, trying to cover his tracks. And if you don't leave now, you might not get out alive." Maggie's pulse quickened. "I'm not leaving, Liam. I'm not backing down. The story's out. They can't stop it now." There was a long pause on the line before Liam spoke again, his voice softer now, almost resigned. "You don't get it. Stone doesn't lose. He'll burn everything to the ground to keep his empire intact. And if you're still here, you'll be the first casualty." Maggie felt a chill run through her. The warning wasn't just a precaution, it was real. And for the first time, she felt the weight of what she was truly up against. "I'm not going anywhere," Maggie said, her voice firm. "I'm going to finish what I started." Liam's silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, he sighed. "Just be careful, Maggie. I'll keep an ear to the ground. If you need to get out, I'll be there. Just don't underestimate them." "I won't," Maggie replied, the resolve in her voice unwavering. She hung up, taking a deep breath. The weight of the decision hit her then. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But she couldn't afford to be afraid. The truth had to come out. Sophie's death, the lives ruined, the corruption, it all needed to be exposed. She would see this through, no matter what it cost her. Chapter 22, The Threats Close In. The next few days felt like a storm building, unseen, but felt in every breath, every whispered conversation. Reporters and authorities were swarming Coral Bay, but the tension beneath the surface was palpable. Maggie had no illusions about the risk she was facing. She knew Stone wouldn't let the truth destroy his empire without a fight. At the local diner, Maggie met with a reporter from a larger news outlet, who had flown in from Seattle. She'd been working on getting the national media involved, but it was clear the story was already too big for the town to handle on its own. "So, what's next?" the reporter, a woman named Claire, asked, scribbling notes in a small notebook. "You've got the evidence, Maggie. What are you planning to do with it?" Maggie hesitated, looking over her shoulder. Her instincts told her someone was watching her. There was a feeling, an almost tangible sense of unease in the pit of her stomach. The past few days had been a blur of phone calls and meetings, but every time she stepped out, it felt as though eyes were on her, eyes that didn't want the truth to see the light of day. "We are pushing the story to the feds," Maggie said quietly, lowering her voice. "I'm talking to the right people. Blackstone's ties to international trafficking, their money laundering, it's all coming together. But we need to make sure the authorities are in control before we publish any more details. We don't want Stone to get any wind of it." Claire nodded, her pen still moving across the page. "And what about you? Are you ready for the fallout?" Maggie stared into her coffee cup, swirling the dark liquid absent-mindedly. "I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this. But it has to be done. If I back down now, I'm just as guilty as the people I'm exposing." Claire paused for a moment, then lowered her voice to match Maggie's. "I've seen the way the locals look at you. They are scared. And the mayor's people, they are already trying to intimidate journalists. I've heard rumors that they are offering people money to stay quiet, to stop talking about the Blackstone story." Maggie clenched her jaw. "I'm not going to be bought off. Not now, not ever." Claire eyed her cautiously. "You might not have a choice. People are disappearing. And Stone isn't just going to let this slide. If he wants to stop you, he will. The words hung between them. Maggie felt them sink in, deep into her bones. This wasn't just about writing a story anymore. This was about survival. Chapter 23, The Fallout Begins. Maggie's world changed overnight. As soon as the story broke to the national press, the impact was immediate. The ripple effect spread quickly, reaching corners of the country that had never heard of Coral Bay. Authorities were being forced to investigate. In the midst of the media frenzy, though, Stone's retaliation began in earnest. Maggie's phone began to ring incessantly with threats, anonymous numbers, cryptic messages, warnings not to speak, not to dig deeper. But it wasn't just the calls. It was the way people looked at her now. Fear in their eyes. Fear for her. Late one evening, Maggie was leaving her apartment when she saw the shadowy figure of a man in a dark hoodie lingering just outside the building. She felt her stomach drop. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching her. Every instinct Maggie had screamed at her to run, but she didn't. She had to stay in control. The man took a slow step toward her. She braced herself for whatever might come next, but just as he reached out, a car honked nearby, and the man immediately turned and disappeared into the night. Her pulse racing, Maggie took a step back into her apartment, her hands trembling. They were getting closer. As the night wore on, Maggie realized that the attack on her life, whether it came in the form of threats or something worse, was inevitable. She had known this all along. Sophie's disappearance hadn't been an accident, and neither would hers. But she refused to let fear dictate her next steps. The truth was out there, and she would see it through, no matter what. Chapter 24, The Last Push. It was a few days after the attempted intimidation that Maggie finally met with the federal investigators. Their presence had been a long time coming, and Maggie had spent the night before going over every detail of the case once more. There was so much evidence now, enough to take down an empire. The meeting took place in a quiet room in a federal building just outside the city. Maggie sat across from two agents, her stomach a storm of nerves and determination. "You've done good work, Miss Price," one of the agents, a man in his late 40s with a stern demeanor, said. "But you've also put yourself in a very dangerous position. We are ready to move forward with the investigation, but we need you to be prepared. This isn't going to be easy." "I'm ready," Maggie replied, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "I've seen what they are capable of. I've lived it. But I'm not backing down." The second agent, a woman with dark hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "The mayor's already made moves. People have started disappearing again. It's clear they are preparing for something big. We'll need your help to bring this to an end." Maggie nodded, taking a deep breath. "I won't let them get away with it. I'll do whatever it takes." As the agents briefed her on their plans to apprehend the people involved in the network, Maggie felt a strange calm settle over her. It wasn't over yet. But she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The truth would come out, and she would see it through to the end. And this time, nothing would stop her. Chapter 25, The Storm Before the Calm. The days following the meeting with the federal agents were a blur of preparation. Maggie found herself balancing the weight of keeping the truth alive with the very real fear that the forces she had set in motion could, at any moment, spin out of control. Stone and his people were growing desperate, and their attempts to intimidate her were becoming bolder, more reckless. But Maggie was focused now. She knew the endgame was in sight, even if it seemed like the storm was building around her. She spent her days cross-referencing evidence, double-checking facts, and preparing to testify. The agents had told her to lay low, to stop making public appearances, but Maggie's instincts told her she couldn't afford to hide. Every day she delayed meant another opportunity for Stone to cover his tracks, to get away with everything. The investigation was progressing behind the scenes, but with each new piece of information, the stakes grew higher. Sophie's murder was just the tip of the iceberg, and Maggie had seen enough to know that what was about to unfold would shake Coral Bay to its very core. That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. Her mind buzzed with the details of the case, and even though she was exhausted, the adrenaline kept her wide awake. She stared at the file in front of her, filled with photographs, documents, and transcripts of phone calls. This was the last piece of the puzzle. The small knock on her door startled her, and she jumped to her feet. Her hand hovered over the lock as she peered through the peephole. "Liam," she whispered, recognizing his figure outside. She opened the door slowly, and Liam stepped inside, his face pale. Something about him was different tonight, more urgent, more strained. "I thought you were staying out of town," Maggie said, stepping back to let him in. "I couldn't," Liam said, his voice tense. He looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to follow him. "They know. They've been watching me. I couldn't leave you like this." Maggie frowned, stepping closer. "What's going on? Is it Stone?" Liam's eyes were dark with worry. "It's worse than that. The feds, they've been compromised. Someone in the investigation is working with Stone. I've seen the signs. He's got people everywhere. He's moving fast, Maggie. He's ready to make his final play." Maggie's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? What's he planning?" Liam hesitated, his hands trembling. "I'm not sure yet, but he's got resources, people who are untouchable. And now, it looks like they are trying to get to you. I don't think it's going to be long before they try to make you disappear, too." Maggie's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't back down. "I'm not afraid of him. We've got the truth. I'm not going to stop now." Liam's eyes softened with something close to regret. "I'm not saying you should stop. But you need to be ready for what comes next. Stone is too powerful. He's not just going to sit back and let this happen. He's going to make sure you pay for what you've done. And so will anyone who's helped you." Maggie's mind raced as she processed his words. Her investigation had brought them this far, but if the feds had been compromised, then they were on their own. It was just the two of them now, and whatever came next, she would have to fight alone. "Then we make sure we are ready," Maggie said, her voice calm but determined. "We have the evidence, Liam. We have the truth. And we are going to use it. No matter what Stone does." Liam looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But if we are going down this road, we do it on our terms." "On our terms," Maggie repeated. She grabbed the file from the table, her grip tightening around it. The truth was her weapon. She would use it to bring Stone down, even if it cost her everything. Chapter 26, The Game Turns. The next morning, Maggie and Liam worked in silence, preparing the evidence to send to the right people, federal authorities who hadn't been compromised, journalists who could help them take the story national again. Maggie wasn't just going to expose the corruption in Coral Bay, she was going to make sure that the world knew the lengths Stone had gone to cover up his crimes. Liam was focused, moving quickly, his nerves visible but contained. Every now and then, he'd glance out the window, his eyes scanning the street, as if expecting something, or someone. "Liam, what are we missing?" Maggie asked, trying to stay calm. "We've got the story. We've got the proof. This should be enough." He didn't respond immediately. He walked to the window again, peering outside. When he turned back to her, his face was taut. "Stone's been quiet," Liam said. "That's not a good sign." Maggie frowned. "What do you mean?" "He's been waiting," Liam continued. "He's letting the media frenzy die down a bit, but that's because he's planning something. When people stop paying attention, that's when he'll move. And when he does, we need to be ready. Maggie sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. The stakes were higher now than they had ever been. She wasn't just a journalist anymore, she was a target. And if Stone thought for a second that she would back down, he had no idea who he was dealing with. "I'll be ready," Maggie said. "I'll make sure the world knows what he's done." Chapter 27, The Trap. As the days went on, the tension in Coral Bay was almost palpable. The quiet before the storm felt like a ticking time bomb. The authorities were starting to move in, but Maggie knew that Stone wasn't done yet. She could feel it in her gut. He was playing a long game, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then it happened. Maggie had just finished a phone call with an investigator when she stepped out of her office to find Liam standing in the hallway, his face pale. His phone was in his hand, and his eyes were locked onto hers. "They've found us, Maggie," Liam said, his voice urgent. "We need to move. Now?" Maggie's pulse spiked. "What do you mean?" "They've set a trap. The feds who were working with us, they've been compromised. They are going to raid the building any minute. The evidence, they are going to destroy it." Maggie's blood ran cold. She knew exactly what this meant. Stone wasn't just trying to stop the investigation, he was trying to erase every last piece of evidence before it could be used against him. "Where's the backup?" Maggie demanded. "We need to get to the evidence. We can't let them destroy it." Liam grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back exit. "We don't have time for that. They are already here. If we are not careful, they'll make sure you're gone before the day ends." They ran out into the night, the sound of distant sirens and the low hum of activity in the streets making Maggie's heart race. She had no idea who was still on her side or who had betrayed them, but one thing was certain, Stone had made his move, and now, it was a race against time. Chapter 28, The Final Stand. As they reached a safe house just outside Coral Bay, Maggie's thoughts raced. She wasn't sure how long they had, but she knew it wouldn't be long before Stone's people found them. And when they did, they wouldn't stop until everything was buried. But Maggie wasn't going down without a fight. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about Sophie, about every life that had been destroyed by Stone's empire, about every secret the town had tried to bury. "Liam," Maggie said, pulling him aside, "we've come this far. We can't stop now." Liam nodded grimly. "I know. It's not just your fight anymore." Maggie pulled the final pieces of evidence from her bag, photos, recordings, and documents, and looked them over one last time. This was it. The final stand. "Let's finish this," Maggie said, her voice steady, her resolve unwavering. The storm was finally about to break. Chapter 29, The Last Gamble. The safe house was nothing more than a small, inconspicuous cottage on the outskirts of Coral Bay. Hidden among the thick trees and winding roads, it offered some semblance of security, but not for long. Maggie knew that Stone's people wouldn't be far behind. The moment they realized she was missing, they would be on her trail, following any lead they could. Liam paced the room, his phone pressed to his ear as he whispered into it, his face grim. Maggie couldn't make out the words, but the anxiety in his posture was palpable. She had never seen him like this before, on edge, as if every moment could be their last. She watched him, trying to focus, trying to calm her nerves. The evidence, the final pieces of the puzzle, were now in her hands. The recordings from the secret meetings, the photos of the shell companies and offshore accounts, everything that tied Robert Stone to the international trafficking ring was here. This wasn't just about bringing down a local crime boss anymore. It was about a global operation that had destroyed countless lives. Maggie felt the weight of it, but she also felt the resolve deep inside her. This was her moment. There was no turning back now. But as Liam hung up the phone, his eyes meeting hers, she saw the uncertainty in them. They've figured it out, Maggie, Liam said, his voice tight. We have less than an hour before they get to us. Maggie's heart raced, but she didn't let panic show. She had worked too hard to let fear take over now. We need to send everything to the press. Everything. They can't destroy the truth if it's out in the open. Liam nodded, though the worry in his eyes didn't ease. The feds, well, we can't trust them anymore. Some of them have already turned. If we do this, we are going rogue. No one can stop us. Maggie met his gaze and took a deep breath. We've already crossed that line. She grabbed her laptop and connected to a secure server, fingers flying over the keys as she uploaded the files. The documents, the audio recordings, the evidence that Stone had tried so desperately to hide, it was all going out. There was no going back. If they were going to be caught, it would be for a reason. This story had to be told, even if it meant risking everything. Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching on the gravel driveway cut through the air. Maggie's stomach twisted in dread. They are here, Liam said, his voice barely a whisper. Get the files out, Maggie urged, already moving toward the back door. I'll keep them distracted. Liam hesitated. Maggie. I'm not leaving without a fight, she interrupted, turning back to face him. I've got this. Just make sure they get the story. Before Liam could say another word, Maggie was out the door, her breath catching as she sprinted into the woods. The trees were dense, the underbrush thick with foliage, but she had spent enough time in the coastal wilderness to know her way around. She just needed to buy herself some time. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of movement, footsteps, shouting, the unmistakable sound of cars being parked. Stone's men were closing in, and they wouldn't give up without a fight. Maggie's pulse pounded in her ears, but she pushed herself harder, darting through the trees. Chapter 30, The Final Confrontation. Maggie had made it deeper into the woods than she'd anticipated when she heard the crackling of branches behind her. Her heart skipped a beat. They were getting closer. She ducked behind a large tree, pressing her back against the rough bark as she listened. Her breath was shallow, her muscles tense. She wasn't sure if they had spotted her yet, but she had no intention of making it easy for them. She grabbed her phone from her pocket, typing furiously. The story was out. The files were on their way to multiple news outlets, and federal agents who hadn't been compromised had already been alerted. If she could just survive long enough to make sure they had everything. Another rustling sound. This time, it was closer, just a few yards away. Maggie held her breath, waiting for the footsteps to pass. But they didn't. She heard the unmistakable sound of a voice calling out, low and controlled, like someone trying to keep their cool. Maggie Price, the voice said. You're not getting away. Maggie's heart sank. Robert Stone himself. She'd known it was only a matter of time before he showed up. She turned slightly, peering through the trees, her eyes catching a glimpse of Stone's silhouette, standing just ahead with two of his men. He was calm, too calm. I've been tracking you for days. You thought you could just walk away from all this, but I'm afraid you've made a grave mistake. Maggie gripped the trunk of the tree harder, feeling the sweat beading on her brow. I haven't made any mistakes, she said, her voice steady, though the knot in her stomach tightened. You're the one who made the mistake, Stone. You've been caught. Stone laughed, the sound dark and chilling. You think this is over, Maggie? You think you can expose me and walk away untouched? The files you've sent, the story you've started to tell, it's nothing but a piece of paper. I've destroyed bigger threats than you. Not this time, Maggie said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. The truth's already out. It's too late to stop it. Stone's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he straightened. Maybe. But you don't understand, do you? I control everything. You're just one little journalist. One little girl trying to play in the big leagues. People like you don't get to win. They get erased. Maggie swallowed the fear rising in her chest. She knew this was her final confrontation. It wasn't just her life at stake anymore. The story was already out there, one way or another, it was going to change things. But if Stone had his way, she wouldn't live to see it. I'm not afraid of you, Stone, Maggie said, the words more forceful than she felt. You're not invincible. Not anymore. Stone's eyes flashed with fury. He made a slight gesture, and his men advanced, their footsteps heavy as they closed in. Maggie's pulse quickened. She knew she couldn't outrun them, couldn't fight them off. But she had one last card to play. With a swift movement, she pulled out her phone and pressed the call button. Before she could stop herself, she whispered into it, her voice shaky, but loud enough for the receiver to hear. This is Maggie Price, she said. I've just sent all the files. You have everything. Get it to the authorities. Get it to the press. It's over for Robert Stone. Stone's men stopped in their tracks, confused, as Maggie snapped the phone shut and tucked it into her pocket. She took one step back, her mind racing. Let's see how you get out of this one, she muttered under her breath. Chapter 31, The Collapse. Maggie didn't know how much time had passed since she made the call, but the tension in the air had shifted. Stone's face twisted with rage as his men advanced, but before they could reach her, a loud sound broke the silence, sirens. Lots of them. Maggie's heart leapt in her chest. In that instant, she realized what had happened. Liam had made sure the authorities were on their way. While she had been running, he had contacted everyone they could trust, and the feds were now storming the woods to stop Stone before he could silence her for good. Stone's expression turned to one of shock as he realized his grip on the situation was slipping. This isn't over, he growled, spinning on his heel to flee into the trees. But it was too late. Feds and local law enforcement flooded the area, surrounding Stone's men before they could react. In the chaos, Maggie heard someone shout her name. Liam emerged from the trees, his face pale but relieved. He didn't hesitate, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her toward safety. You did it, he said, breathless. You really did it. Maggie looked back at the law enforcement, Stone's empire crumbling around them, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe. The truth was out. It was over. But as they made their way back to the safety of the town, Maggie knew one thing for sure, this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. End of novel. Maggie Price had taken on the most dangerous man in Coral Bay and won. The truth had finally come to light, exposing the dark secrets of Robert Stone and the trafficking ring he ran. But the fight for justice was far from over. In the wake of Stone's downfall, Maggie would have to contend with new challenges, new threats, and the haunting realization that corruption ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. But with her resolve and the truth on her side, Maggie was ready to face whatever came next.